Hey, welcome to Mooney Reads. My name is Beck, and today I'm going to be doing a mid-month entertainment wrap-up. So I'm going to talk about the shows, movies, and books that I've interacted with this week, and what I thought about them, and then towards the end I'm going to talk a little bit about music as well. Now, for the few people who follow me on Twitter and actually pay attention to what I post, you may be wondering, Beck, did you decide to do this sort of entertainment wrap-up just so that you could talk about Feel Good? And the answer to that is basically. But I did like more than just Feel Good, so it's good that this was the month that I decided to start this. So, the very first thing that I watched or read this month was Feel Good, which is a show on Netflix that I just adore. It's also the second and third and fifth thing that I watched or read this month. I literally watched the entire season 4 different times by myself. I wasn't even showing it to somebody else. I just really adore it. It's funny and emotional and very, very gay. I just have a lot of thoughts and feelings. It kind of focuses on the main character, May, who is a comedian. During the very first episode, she ends up finding this girl. They hook up, and of course that hookup turns into kind of a long-term thing. And it goes through their experience being together and some of the issues that they face, particularly since the love interest, George, has never dated a girl before. So she's navigating basically being closeted, so that's a really big theme on top of all of this. And of course May is dealing with stuff outside of this. She's dealing with stuff at work, and she's also recovering from addiction, which plays a really big role in the show as well. So definitely content warning for addiction, content warning for internalized homophobia and transphobia, because May also talks about gender. I have a lot of feelings about it, but I don't want to say too much because it is in later episodes. And also trigger warning for sexual harassment. The relationship dynamic that they show is definitely kind of chaotic. It's not super healthy, but that's kind of the point of showing it, right? Really, I have so much to say about Feel Good, but it's really hard to do without giving away any spoilers. And I will say that a big part of why I enjoyed it too is probably because I've completely fallen in love with Mae Martin, but we won't talk about that. Please watch it and please talk to me about it because I have feelings that I don't know what to do with. Next, I watched Disclosure, which is a documentary about trans representation in the media. And they basically go through and interview a bunch of people who are actors, writers, and different people within the television process who are trans, and they talk to them about their experiences seeing trans people on screen. This was really excellent. It definitely felt like kind of the missing chapter of The Celluloid Closet, if you've ever seen that or read it. I haven't personally read it. I've only seen the documentary adaptation. The Celluloid Closet basically goes through and talks about gay representation starting at the very beginning of film, working it their way across, and they talk about gay men in film, gay women in film, but they don't really touch on trans people, I don't think. So this was really great. It gave me a lot of feelings, especially just considering some of the things that I've done in my research. A heavy theme with a lot of the people that I've interviewed was on trans representation. There are also a number of articles and different things like that that have focused on that issue. It actually gave me a bit of energy to continue writing a version of an article that's based on my thesis that I started and then stopped because I got overwhelmed. I have not actually worked on it, but I have been inspired to work on it, so hopefully it will come soon. I'm struggling, but that's fine. Next, I finally finished the first book of the month, The Henna Wars by Adiba Jagiridar. This was such an excellent start to the month. This was a book that I've been looking forward to for a while. Just the cover alone made me just need this book. It focuses in on Nishat, who sees her childhood friend Flavia at a wedding that she goes to, and she realizes that there are still feelings there for her. And as we go on, it turns out that Flavia is actually going to be at Nishat's school the next year. A wrench sort of gets put into this because there ends up being this school project that's a competition, so they end up competing against each other. While all of this is going on, Nishat is also coming out to her family as a lesbian. So she's dealing with kind of their reaction in the midst of all of this as well. Now, I ended up really enjoying this book. I thought that the character development was really wonderful, not just for Nishat, but for Nishat's sister, for a number of different secondary characters. And I think that the work was able to engage with a lot of different issues that people face. It talked about cultural appropriation, it talked about coming out and the trouble with that in certain situations, it talked about racism, and it was all done very well, I think, for a YA context and for the plot that it had. I don't think that any of that necessarily overshadowed any part of the plot. I thought it was really well done. So if you're looking for something cute and sapphic, I definitely recommend this. I ended up giving it 4 stars. After reading The Henna Wars, I watched Hamilton, of course, along with the rest of the internet. I ended up watching it twice, actually, once with one of my friends and then another time with 2 of my friends, thanks to Zoom. And it was a really great time. In like 2016, when the album came out, I was super obsessed along with several of my other friends. So it really means a lot, and it's got a lot of nostalgic qualities at this point, and it was so cool to be able to see it put together. They did so much really awesome things with the staging, that rotating stage, the way that they used kind of all of their space was just incredible. And I have to say, the best part of it is probably Renee Goldsberry's facial expressions. Like, the Schuyler Sisters was already a great song to begin with, and then adding in how she just did not give any fucks about any of the men on stage with that facial expression, it just gave me so much life. I'm in love with Renee Goldsberry, if that wasn't clear. Then after watching Hamilton, I read the first volume of Given by Natsuki Kizu. Given is a manga that I have seen really hyped by Audrey from Perpetual Pages, and that's why I picked it up. It had been on my radar because they'd read the first volume and they talked about it, but really what got me to actually, like, in that moment, Google it and see that it was online was a tweet that they put out where they were freaking out about it, and I was like, okay, I've got to read this. So I finished the first 6 chapters or so that made up the first volume. Given is basically the story of these 2 boys, Onoyama and Mafuyu. Mafuyu is this kind of mysterious, aloof boy that wants to learn guitar, and Onoyama is a guitarist in a band. So they sort of start talking. Onoyama is a little bit hesitant at first, but then hears Mafuyu sing and tries to get him to be a part of his band. So you get to learn more about both of them as well as the other band members, and it's just a really good gay time. In the first volume so far, it definitely seems like feelings are developing, but there's nothing like 100% concrete yet, but I am looking forward to it. I don't think that I give this a star rating, or I think I've given it like about like somewhere between a 3.5 and 4 stars, but it's so hard sometimes, especially with these larger series, because I feel like I always end up going back and thinking, well, why did I give that 5 stars when, you know, volume 3 is so much better or whatever. So that star rating is subject to change. But it's really emotional and gay, so if you're about that, I recommend looking that up. After that, I finished Dear Evan Hansen, which is a book that's written based off of the musical Dear Evan Hansen. I had a lot of thoughts about this, and I've actually filmed a video kind of about the book and the musical, discussing different elements of them and which one I liked better. That I'm not sure if I'm going to put that up before or after this one, but if you're interested in what I thought about Dear Evan Hansen, definitely check that out. I don't remember exactly what star rating I gave this. I think it was between a 3 and a 4. Honestly, if the book by itself, like if I didn't know anything about the musical, I probably would have rated it lower, but I think it's a good companion to the musical. Which is the next thing that I ended up finishing. Obviously, I cannot leave my house and go see it anywhere because there are no productions going on in the middle of a pandemic. However, some wonderful people in a variety of places have put it up less than legally online, which is a benefit for the rest of us, I suppose. So I ended up watching that again and having lots of feelings about it again. But if you want to know more about that, you can check out my Dear Evan Hansen video. After that, I ended up starting The Wisdom of the Enneagram. I'm still going through it, but I'm really interested in the Enneagram. I haven't talked about the Enneagram a ton on here, but it's been really helpful for me. My therapist uses it. I've read a couple of books, The Road Back to You, and then Beatrice Chestnut's book on the Enneagram. It's been really helpful to be able to see myself within a certain framework, because there were certain pieces of myself that I thought were bad or broken or just super different, but seeing kind of that there's a reason behind all of that has been really wonderful. I'm an Enneagram 9, probably with a 1 wing for anyone who's interested. But I think that this is probably a really good beginner's book. This one also adds in a couple of other categories that each of the numbers are put in, that's really interesting. I won't go super in depth into it, but this is super cool, and it's one of the things that I guess I'm currently in the middle of reading. After that, I caught up on Heartstopper. The last time that I had read any of it was probably in April, when I originally read all of it. I had bought the first book and I read it. Got really sad that I didn't have the rest. I looked it up and apparently it's all online for free. Alice Oseman just posts it. So I literally read everything that there was. I ended up staying up until like 3 in the morning or something like that, and it was a wonderful time. But I hadn't checked it out since then, so I was able to catch up a little bit this month. Next, I read Being Hospitable by Mika James. This is an adult romance novella. I am not very well versed in adult romance. I've only tried a couple of things, and I haven't ever really loved much, but I also haven't read a lot of LGBT adult romance, so I was going to try some of that this month. This is one of the ones that I had planned on reading that was on my TBR. I have at least one other one, plus I've got a couple that are in my Kindle that I want to read. And this was pretty good. I think that since it was a novella, you know, it was a little bit short. I would have liked to see more relationship development on page. But overall, there was a good relationship dynamic. They talked about consent a lot, which is super awesome, especially compared to the little bit of romance that I have read on top of, you know, the general culture of sex. That isn't really something that's talked about as much as it should. I'm not really sure if it's the genre for me, but it was interesting to read and to kind of try out, and I'll definitely be trying a couple of others like I mentioned. After finishing Being Hospitable, I started Revolutionary by Alex Myers. I am not very far into it at all. I am on page 17 apparently, and I have been looking for my glasses cloth for the past 2 days, and apparently I decided to use it as a bookmark, and I feel really ridiculous right now. Revolutionary is a historical fiction story that focuses on Deborah Sampson, who was one of the women who dressed up as men in order to engage with the Revolutionary War. This is not typically an era that I focus in. Some stuff that's set like in the 17 and 1800s sometimes just makes me tired, and I don't know how to explain that. But it's interesting so far. I was a little put off because there was a rape scene that I was just not really prepared for, but this seems like it's going to be interesting. The reason that I picked it up is because it's written by a trans man, and so I think that it discusses gender a little bit more thoroughly. I'll put the link to the podcast that I heard about this in down below, because I think hearing the author talk about it is really interesting. Next, I started reading Revolution Manifesto, which is on my TBR. This focuses on looking at Marx and Lenin's written works, and kind of gives them some background and stuff like that. I've read Marx before, so I thought that I would go ahead and start this and then read it, get into the background, and then later on read some of Lenin's stuff, but I changed my mind when I started reading it, and I ended up finding the first work that it really focuses on online for free, and that is State and Revolution. I don't think there's a good cover for this, so I'll just put it on the screen. But I started to read that, and I think I'm going to finish that before going back to Revolution Manifesto. So that's it for the books and shows, but I did also want to talk about the music that I've been listening to, because I've been listening to a lot of music. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that too. And I've been thinking about the best way to do this, because I do have a lot of music that's like the staple music that I'm always listening to, and I feel like if I ramble about that, that'll just take a really long time. So I'm just going to talk about a few different artists that I went out of my way to listen to. If you're interested in hearing about my staple playlists, like the ones that I play all the time, definitely let me know. Lately, I've been having some problems breaking away from those playlists and listening to new stuff. It's not exactly a new problem, but I have been putting those on loop. I also listen to some musical soundtracks because I've been listening to Dear Evan Hansen and Hamilton. I've been in that mood. But other than that, I listened to a lot of the Mountain Goats. The Mountain Goats are one of my favorite bands, and sometimes I just really need to listen to John Darnielle scream with an acoustic guitar. The Mountain Goats is basically an indie folk band, which I guess doesn't tell you very much, but they have a really wide discography. A lot of their stuff is lo-fi, but some of the more recent stuff has a slightly different sound. All of it's really good. I don't think that I've ever heard an album that I didn't like. A lot of their music is very emotional, which I really enjoy. And then some of the albums actually have like lore underneath them. So there's a storytelling aspect that's super interesting. I do really enjoy some of the lo-fi stuff, even though I'm not as familiar with some of their super early albums. But I think a couple of my favorite albums are Come to the Sunset Tree, which is one of the lo-fi ones. It's unfortunately not on Spotify. It's the original version of Sunset Tree, which is out. The other ones that I really enjoy are All Hail West Texas and Tallahassee. The Mountain Goats also has the added benefit of the fact that I don't know their entire discography, and their discography is so large that, like, even if I have heard some of the songs or some of the albums, I'm not 100% familiar with all of it. So if I want something new, but I also need something comforting, I can go to them pretty easily and find something. I also listened to The Midnight a whole lot, which is like a synthwave band. There's not really a whole lot of lyrics, so it's really good to read to. A lot of it's pretty mellow. It definitely has like 80s vibes. I love the songs that incorporate saxophone in them. It's a really great time. A notable throwback that I listen to, which I tend to go to music that I listened to in high school every once in a while just because I need the nostalgia serotonin, but I don't usually listen to them when I'm going to that, and that is Asking Alexandria. I listened to their 2009 album, and it was amusing, if nothing else. I think that if I were to listen to them for the first time, I probably would not have listened to the whole album, but it was just really fun to listen to and think of where my mindset was at the time. I remember me and some of my other friends thinking that it was cool or edgy in some way, and it's just really funny to think about that. I don't necessarily think that I would recommend it, but that's what I listened to. And then the last band that I was going to mention is Computer Games, which is a band that is headed by Darren Criss and Darren Criss's brother, Chuck Criss. I've adored Darren Criss for a really long time. I used to have this huge crush on him, starting with seeing him in a Harry Potter musical. He's actually the reason that I watched Glee in like 2012. But regardless, I really love him. I love his music, and Computer Games, especially, like, Every Single Night is probably my favorite, and it has this really upbeat, summery 80s vibe that I just really adore. I want more music with those vibes, so if anybody has suggestions, absolutely let me know. That is it for what I have read so far in the month of July. Hopefully I will be finishing the things that I talked about, starting to read. Hopefully this will give me extra incentive to finish them. Let me know about some of the stuff that you've been reading and watching recently down in the comments. And like always, thank you all so much for watching. Bye.